Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at The Washington Post. This has been one heck of a week in the nation's capital, so let's get right to it with Washington Post senior national political reporter Ashley Parker. Ashley, welcome back to First Look.
Thanks for having me.
So yesterday, 9 days after Election Day, the Republican Party won its 200th. Well, actually, was that yesterday? What's today? Friday, Thursday? I think it was Wednesday when the Republicans officially hit 218 seats in the House, making it the majority party for the next Congress. There are still some races left to call, but the Republican majority won't be anywhere near what Republicans hoped or even predicted. How were they able to eke out this majority? Was it gerrymandering?
Well, I think the more apt question is how didn't they do it? That's really the story, is how they ended up with such a narrow majority in what was expected to be, including not just by Republicans, but by Democrats, a
Right.
real red wave. So yes, gerrymandering has long played a factor in largely benefiting Republicans. So that's sort of a background at play factor. But the way in which they really encountered challenges, when you look at a president like President Biden with pretty bad popularity numbers, when you look at inflation, when you look at just history and that the president in power, his party often loses a significant number of House seats that first midterm election. What happened was that voters didn't like what Republicans were selling, which was a mix of, Trump-inspired MAGA extremism, and also put broadly under the bucket of taking away rights, whether that was the right to a functioning democracy, which of course has ties to the MAGA extremism I just referenced, or the rights of women with the Dobbs decision to control what happens with their own bodies and their own medical care. This proved way more compelling for the Democrats or problematic for the Republicans than I think either party expected.
House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy was able to win 188 votes, a majority. This is in his quest to be the next speaker. That's a majority of the Republican conference, but to become he's going to need 30 more votes if he's going to, in the entire House, when they vote in early January, if he is actually able to get the speaker's gavel. Is McCarthy in any real danger of not being the next speaker?
So, yes and no. The conventional wisdom is that ultimately McCarthy will end up as the next speaker, in part because no one has really on the Republican side put forward a plausible alternative. Also, this is reported from a couple days ago, but in talking to people in Trump's orbit, as of then at least, the former president was also prepared to support him. Trump coming in and trying to torpedo him would totally upend the landscape, but as of now, that does not seem to be the plan. Often in this first initial ballot, the whoever is running for speaker, Democrat, Republican, even Speaker Pelosi, doesn't always hit that 218 threshold. But it's worth noting that McCarthy is way further below, away that from that magic number of 218. Than other leaders have been in that first initial ballot. They may not get all 218, but they're 15 votes short, or they're 18 votes short. They're not 30 votes short. So it's a real challenge, but nobody can point to the person they think is more likely than Kevin McCarthy.
I mean, to your point, usually the speaker nominee has a cushion. As you pointed out, Nancy Pelosi had a cushion. A lot of people were able to not vote for her, and she still got the gavel. Is there any likelihood that McCarthy could convince a good chunk of the 30 to help him get over the top, to help make him speaker?
Well, some of these initial votes, these 30 who didn't vote for him, have the luxury in this round of balloting of being sort of protest votes, right? Putting him on notice, a vote against him because there's a concession they want to extract. One thing that was striking to me that in Leader McCarthy's favor is that Marjorie Taylor Greene, who does not feel like a natural McCarthy ally, has come out and said we all need to support him because we don't want to empower the Democrats. Then you have people like Representative Matt Gaetz, who have said, no way, no how, I will never vote for Leader McCarthy. And when we don't know the exact final number of what the House Republican caucus will be, but he's going to have a cushion of about 4 or so. And that's very, very few to lose. It's worth noting that Speaker Pelosi really only had that exact same cushion, but she has long proven herself over the decades an incredibly powerful and compelling and feared leader of her caucus. And there's no indication that McCarthy, from what we've seen so far, has that skill set or that respect or that loyalty from the majority of his caucus.
Well, Ashley, let's keep talking about Speaker Pelosi, who announced yesterday that she was staying in Congress, but not seeking a leadership position within the Democratic caucus. President Biden called her, quote, the most consequential speaker in history. What is the legacy of Speaker Nancy Pelosi?
Well, how much time do we have, Jonathan?
You got about 90 seconds on this question.
Okay, very, very quickly, of course, as we all know, she's the first female speaker elected. And I think she ushered in not just a Democratic caucus that looks incredibly different, where there are new members who are women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ community. She's long fought for progressive policy. She's an incredible fundraiser. So a lot of these Democrats who will succeed her and be in Congress for far longer were in part due to money Pelosi raised. Of course, the reason that Obamacare passed is because Pelosi was able to muscle it through. And I feel like that's 90 seconds, but I could certainly keep going.
Well, I do want to get in one more thing before I have to let you go. And also on that Obamacare vote, that is perhaps one of her most proudest achievements. You ask her about her whip ability, and she will tell you, we passed it with not a single Republican vote. Ashley, you know what else happened this week? This happened in Palm Beach, Florida on Tuesday.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
So, Ashley, you reported in the Post yesterday that Trump's announcement did nothing to clear the field, the Republican field. You also report that this run will resemble the first one in 2016 rather than his 2020 re-election campaign. Why?
Well, that's what he's hoping. I mean, for starters, it's worth noting that despite what the former president says, in 2016 he won, and in 2020 he lost. So from a certain kind of psychic cosmic level, it's probably more appealing to him to resemble the campaign that brought him to the White House. But he wanted to have that sort of scrappy underdog feel. In some ways, that's easier when he's not in power, when he's running against an incumbent. 2016, frankly, was not particularly professional. He does have professionals surrounding him, but there's already some signs that raise eyebrows that he's not going to have a traditional campaign manager. That feels like a recipe for disaster. But on the other hand, it's worth noting that the sort of 3 top people in his campaign are all seasoned Republicans who are considered, again, professional, responsible, competent at their jobs, which was not how 2016 began.
And one more question for you. Is one of the reasons his announcement didn't clear the field is because his potential rivals either hold him responsible for the Republicans' relatively poor midterm showing, or they view him as a weakened candidate because of it?
Well, I mean, what really matters at the end of the day, and this is why Trump could still be the front runner, could be the nominee, is what Republican voters want, and then specifically what the Republican base wants. But the party has long wanted to move past Trump. They didn't even like him when he started in 2015, 2016. And so donors who have long disliked him dislike him even more. Party leaders who have long disliked him dislike him even more. Lawmakers who won't publicly say this, but who privately have long disliked him even more, in part because he's that thing that is the worst insult you can say about him, but a political loser. He lost in 2020. He lost the presidency. He also helped lose they blame him for losing 2 Georgia Senate seats right afterwards. He obviously encouraged a deadly insurrection on the U.S. Capitol. And then he helped, they believe, lose or have far less of a good showing in these 22 midterms as well. While he was president, it's worth noting he also lost in the midterms, but again, that's sort of historically expected, and there wasn't as much blame there as there have been in these other places.
Ashley Parker, Washington Post senior national political correspondent. Thank you, as always, for coming to First Look. Have a great weekend.
You too.
All right, we're going to keep the conversation going with our opinions roundtable in just a moment. Let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find Washington Post associate editor Ruth Marcus and Washington Post columnist Hugh Hewitt. Ruth, Hugh, welcome back to First Look.
Morning, everybody.
Okay, Hugh, you knew. I'm sure you knew this was coming, because the last time you were here, the Friday before the midterms, you said, and I kept it, I wrote it down on the piece of paper from that day. You said Republicans would win 25 seats in the House and 1 seat in the Senate. They very well might with the runoff in Georgia. So far, they have only 218 seats, Republicans, in the House, and failed to take the majority in the Senate. What happened, Hugh?
Underwhelming performance by Republican candidates. I'm very disappointed. I missed by a lot, but not, 2 weeks later, I'm already off the ground, go on to the next cycle. Resilience is part of politics. We've lost a lot, we've won a lot in our lives, and we learn how to get over it. Republicans did not deliver what they thought. I think probably because, as everyone has said, candidate quality. They came up short in a number of races. But I also have to look at the student loan bailout as being the driver of the youth vote gap, which is the most significant. As far as I can tell, it's pretty early for some of the exit data to tell us anything. But I would put down the rather cynical student loan bailout, which is going to be turned over by the courts, already has been enjoined by the courts, as unconstitutional, actually drove turnout on college campuses and among young people in debt under the age of 30 in a way I had not anticipated. And Dobbs had a much greater impact, especially on Republican women, that we did not anticipate. I thought it would motivate both sides of the base. It, in fact, motivated the left side of the pro-reproductive rights movement, not the pro-life movement as much. So I think that's it in the answer. Bad candidate deficits, student loan bailout, Dobbs.
Ruth, some Republicans appear to blame Donald Trump for the poor showing. Was it him or candidate quality, as he was talking about, or was it Dobbs that became the dam that stopped the promised quote unquote red wave?
I think there's lots of blame to go around, and I would point out on Hugh's behalf that if he anticipated a Republican red wave, he was not alone in that anticipation. He was actually on the low end of things. I think a bunch of things conspired against Republicans or were self-inflicted against Republicans. One of them was that the Supreme Court decision had a way more significant impact than I had anticipated when it first came out, and it really energized people. I think it energized people much more than the student loan bailout. I also think that Trump was to blame, not just because people are getting tired of him, cross my fingers on that, but also because he was inextricably bound up in the candidate quality issue. He supported a whole bunch of people who lost seats that by all rights Republicans should have been able to win. And so I think Mitch McConnell has a Donald Trump voodoo doll that he's busy sticking pins in because he's so angry at seeing the Senate majority snatched away from him once again. And so for me, it was less what Democrats did, though they did the best. They played the best hand that they could, given history and given the terrible, or not terrible, but the problem of inflation in particular staring them down. But this was a self-inflicted wound by Republicans that was exacerbated by the Supreme Court.
Hugh, none of this stopped Donald Trump from announcing a run for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. I'm just wondering, why so early, and why not wait until after the December 6th Georgia runoff for the Senate?
Former president has never been predictable, Jonathan and Ruth. You both know that. And I have no idea why he chose now, other than an attempt to preempt. And I spoke with former Vice President Mike Pence for an hour this week about So Help Me God. I spoke to former Secretary of State Pompeo to dissect the election. Neither of them admit to being influenced at all by the former president's announcement. And I believe that's going to be generally the conclusion of the field. And so I think he attempted to preempt and maybe move some chess pieces off the board, but I don't think it's going to work. But I'm not going to predict anything, because 2016, everybody was wrong. Just like this past cycle, everybody was wrong. American politics are locked in a titanic struggle of a realigning nature that's been going on since 9/11. I would point out in 1934, everyone aspired that Joe Biden was going to be FDR again. Now, do either of you know what happened in 1934 when FDR was FDR, his first off year? He won 9 seats in the House and he won 9 Senate seats in 1934. Joe Biden eked out preserving some authority on the Congress, but he did not realign the country. The country is stuck at 50-50. So I don't know how Donald Trump plays into that, but it's not a realignment.
I mean, I wasn't making a realignment argument. All I'm trying to understand is, in 2020, Republicans blamed Donald Trump for the loss of those 2 Senate seats in Georgia. And now he announces a re-election, a new bid for the White House before another Georgia Senate runoff. Shouldn't Republicans be concerned that past his prologue and that Trump injecting himself into the process before the runoff will lead to Senator Warnock being elected to a full 6-year term?
Well, I'll defer to Ruth for her term, but he's done what he's done. Whether or not it was a good idea, it's done. And so I think Herschel's doing okay down there. I had him on the radio show this week, and Mike Pompeo said, give me a time and date. Everyone's going to go. It's going to be an interesting race. It's much different than 2 years ago, because it's in December, not January. No registration is allowed between the election and the runoff, as opposed to 2 years ago. So I don't know what's going to happen down there, but it's done. So Republicans are just getting on with getting on.
Jonathan, what I say about that is Trump only cares about one thing, which is Trump. He doesn't care about the party or the fate of the party, except as it reflects on Trump. And so I think what happened here in terms of the timing is that he had signaled that he was going to have his big reveal right after the election. He thought the election was going to go better for him and for the party than it did. Backing down would risk the greatest sin in Trump world in his mind, which is looking weak. If he didn't announce, it would look weak. He doesn't want to look weak, even though he is, as I say again, fingers crossed, certainly weaker than he has been vis-a-vis the party since, say, 2015, when people didn't take him seriously enough, as Hugh says. So he had to, I think, continue down this predestined road and play his bad hand as well as he could play it now. Trump promised us in 2015, 2016 that we were going to get tired of winning. I think the question for Republicans, first of all, is whether they are finally tired of losing, because they lost in 2018, they lost in 2020, they've lost, though they gained the House, and that is nothing to sniff at. They've fundamentally lost in 2022 compared to what they expected and compared to what history promises. So do they want to lose again in 2024? It seems like Donald Trump, I keep crossing my fingers here, would be a good bet to help them do that in 2024.
You know, Hugh, something just occurred to me in your response to an earlier answer. You said, you talked about Mike Pence, you talked about former Secretary Pompeo, and you said that that's probably the extent of the field.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. I was misunderstood. That's the field that I talked to this week. I think the field.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Greg Abbott and Tim Scott and Ron DeSantis. It's going to have build a second stage time.
Right, because I was going to say, what about Governor Ron DeSantis? He had a monster win in his reelection effort in Florida. Why shouldn't we consider him to be the biggest threat to Trump's 2024
Well,
ambition?
I think we should. And I'm neutral. I'm in Switzerland. I'm in Republican Switzerland, like I was in 2016, because I want to talk to them all. I'm neutral as to the Republican. I will support whoever the nominee is. But if I'm Donald Trump, I'm looking up at Tallahassee and saying, oh my gosh, that's my biggest problem, because Ron DeSantis has got the Trump agenda and a fresh look and some successes in Florida. But Tim Scott's awfully good. Mike Pompeo's awfully good. Mike Pence is going to run as a traditional Republican, evangelical conservative. And it's going to be an interesting race. I like that you bring up Florida, because the red wave did happen in Florida. It was a big one.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean,
I think red got redder and blue got bluer. Look at Josh Shapiro winning in Pennsylvania. He's the best Democrat. He's the best Democrat in the country. And Attorney General Shapiro, I know him a little bit. I like him a little bit. If he runs against a Republican, or if Jared Polis runs against, we're going to have a great battle, other than Trump, a Republican other than Trump, a generation skip. And I'm looking forward to that, because honest to goodness, we got to get to the millennial. They got to get involved, because these people are too old to run the country.
It's just leapfrog to Gen Z. Hugh, I'm going to stick with you, because I'm just wondering something. Just wondering about House Republicans in their impending leadership. They're already openly discussing possibly launching investigations into President Biden and his handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, his handling of immigration. And as we saw in a press conference yesterday, they're all about Hunter Biden. I'm confused, Hugh, because Republicans all around the country, their campaigns were all about inflation and crime and the hard state of the economy. So why shouldn't anyone view the now stated plans of the incoming Republican majority to be nothing more than an agenda of vengeance?
Everything changed when you don't get the Senate, because you can't do anything on the budget. All right, so it becomes a reconciliation is out the door. They could have done reconciliation with 51 Republican senators. They can't. So the only thing the House can do is negotiate at the 11th hour through Speaker McCarthy and his team, or run investigations. The most significant thing they're going to do is stand up the Select Committee on China, bipartisan. They will let their members, the Democrats, choose their members, and they will move forward on that, I hope, quickly. Comer's a very impressive guy, and I'm not very interested in Hunter Biden. I'm not like zero interested in Joe Biden, because I don't think he's going to run again. I'm just not interested. But the Republicans have got to do what oversight is supposed to do. And I yield back to Ruth, because
oh, that's great. Ruth, what do you think about this? Because it all, to me, just sounds like just a recipe for gridlock supreme.
It's a recipe for worse than that, I think. As from Republicans' point of view, I think that they go full Hunter Biden. They go full oversight. I'm a believer in congressional oversight, but I'm not a believer in hunting after things that voters don't care about, and choose an explanation that, well, they don't have the Senate majority, so they won't be able to do anything, so they're simply relegated to other things. That's not what voters want to hear. Voters don't want endless hearings into Hunter Biden. Voters want to see an agenda from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that says, here are your concerns, here's how we propose to address these concerns. I heard nothing from Republicans during the campaign about what they would actually do to combat inflation. If they had it, it didn't come across to me, and so I don't think it came across to voters. I think Republicans engage in this investigative agenda at their peril. We saw it not work for them with the Clinton impeachment, and I suspect we're going to see it not work for them again. That's not to say it's not going to be an incredible pain for Democrats, and particularly the Biden administration. It is, and I think it's going to be very difficult for Leader McCarthy, assuming he's the speaker, to resist, because I think he will get the 218 votes he needs to become the speaker. But I also think that every day of his speakership, it will be in peril, and he will be having to succumb to the whims and the worst instincts of the most extreme elements of his caucus. And that's going to be his fate, having secured the speakership for the rest of his tenure.
What do you make of that, Hugh? Because, I agree with Ruth in her assessment. If he becomes speaker, it's just going every day is going to be a living hell for the guy. But I'm still not convinced that he's going to be speaker.
Oh, well, he's going to be speaker. And I listened to Ruth very closely on this because I think she's right in terms of the Republicans get off on the wrong foot. And if they don't stay together, they'll all hang separately. Speaker Pelosi, and I want to add the genius of Speaker Pelosi is actually in her perseverance through winning the House twice, losing the House twice, and standing up. Her most important vote was on TARP when she brought Democrats together with Republicans to keep the financial system from collapsing. Kevin McCarthy needs to study her playbook, which is carrots and sticks. And we never see the carrots, but we have seen the sticks. And she's got a left edge of her caucus, which is just as wild and hard to control as McCarthy's right edge of his caucus is. She did it. He has to. Oh, Ilhan Omar and AOC. I mean,
last I checked, they weren't supporting people who invaded the Capitol. But finish your thought, because I want to get.
Well, I don't think any member of the right in Congress invaded the Capitol either, Jonathan. I mean, would you like to name someone?
No, that's not the point I was making. But we've got less than a minute left. Ruth, in the time that we have left, I would love for you to close us out with your thoughts on Nancy Pelosi and her tenure as Speaker of the House.
I wrote a column when she became Speaker. The headline was "Grandma with a Gavel." No one has. Her speakership was extraordinary, as Hugh said, in terms of her ability to take a caucus. I'm more on the Capehart side than on the Hewitt side in terms of how crazy that caucus was compared to the Republicans. But she understood how to keep them in line. It is going to be let me put it this way. Kevin McCarthy is no Nancy Pelosi. And I think we are going to be reminding ourselves of that, or reminded of that many times in the days and weeks and years to come.
Ruth Market. Oh, of course,
I just want
Hugh.
to say,
Have the last word, Hugh.
The Democratic Party is a better party than the Republican Party. They have better organization, better discipline, and it's because of Nancy Pelosi.
And with that, well, that's a nice.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm going to quit while I'm ahead.
She's a Machiavelli. No Machiavelli. Sorry, Jonathan. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, you said something nice, Hugh. Let's leave it there. You and Ruth Marcus. Thank you both, as always, for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Head to WashingtonPostLive.com to find more information about next week's interviews and to register. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live's First Look.